If you think modern life is full of ridiculous decisions, like leaving someone on scene or CEOs posting everything's fine right before the company collapses, let me take you back to the Middle Ages. This was a time when logic took a long vacation and people survived mostly on faith, not soap. Everything was dangerous: disease, war, demons. And the strangest part? Their everyday habits, which they genuinely believed were smart. And if you're into the kind of historical facts that make you pause and think, wait, my ancestors really did that? Congratulations. You're in the right place. While you're here, hit subscribe so you don't miss the madness coming next. Trust me, it only gets weirder. 1. Bathing was suspicious. Back then, bathing wasn't about hygiene, it was a philosophical choice. Many believed that hot water opened the pores, and open pores invited illness in, like kids spotting a cookie sale. Bathing too often was dangerous. Bathing was rarely economical, and skipping it entirely? Morally upright. Records tell of people who bathed just once in their lives, on their wedding day. Maybe to look good, maybe to prove to neighbors, I still remember what water is. When the church declared public baths gates to sin, the rest of Europe collectively shrugged. Bathing alone was suspicious. Bathing together? Probably plotting something. Villagers walked around with smells strong enough to make wildlife consider relocating. The kicker? People thought body odor meant you were healthy. Walk into a room smelling fresh, and instead of compliments, you get concern. Are you dying? The Middle Ages were full of dangers, but stepping into a bath ranked near the top. That's why surviving 24 hours back then was basically a survival show, and why you might want to think twice before taking a shower for fun. 2. If you think modern toilets are inconvenient, the Middle Ages will make you appreciate your bathroom like it's a world wonder. In many castles, they built walls a meter thick, massive watchtowers, and then made bathrooms by carving a hole in the wall so everything fell straight into the moat. No lid, no privacy, just good luck to whoever's below. People genuinely thought this was smart design. No cleaning required. The only problem? Wind. A strong gust could turn going to the bathroom into a thrill ride, where you prayed and tried to guess which way nature was going to swing today. Guests quickly learned the unspoken rule: hear a plop from above. Don't look up. Knights in armor had it even worse. Imagine someone as heavy as a mini fridge trying to balance on a hole dozens of feet above ground. One slip, and they became a story nobody wanted told at dinner. And the moat below? Forget needing an army. The smell was so powerful that even besieging troops admitted they wanted to retreat before fighting, not because of walls, but because the castle was extremely fragrant. In the Middle Ages, toilets weren't just for doing your business. They were passive defense weapons, and ironically, they worked far better than many strategic plans drawn up on a table. 3. The Middle Ages had doctors, but don't picture them like the ones at your local hospital. They didn't ask about symptoms, didn't check your temperature. They looked up at the sky. Yep. Astrology was basically the medical degree of the era. If you sneezed, they didn't think it was a cold. They thought Saturn was in a bad mood. Patients would walk into the clinic while the doctor unrolled star charts, looked up, and said in a professional tone, "Mars is in Cancer today, so your liver is a bit irritable." Someone might have a stomachache, but once the doctor checked the moon's position, it wasn't a stomachache. It was the spirit of mischief messing with your gut. The funniest part? They believed it wholeheartedly. Some doctors refused to treat patients if the stars weren't aligned. Imagine running a high fever while the doctor says, "No medicine today, Venus is grumpy." The result? Minor illnesses became major ones. Major illnesses became funerals. But in the Middle Ages, it wasn't the doctor's fault. It was the universe's. Going to a doctor back then was basically playing the lottery with the sky. And if your luck depended on a star chart, it's no wonder life expectancy was short enough to make you feel guilty just for being born. 4. If you think modern hospitals are scary, imagine a Middle Ages operating room, where the equipment was a wooden table, a knife whose last sharpening is anyone's guess, a bottle of strong liquor, and the belief that God had some free time to help you out. Anesthesia? That concept sounded like a fairy tale. The closest thing they had was alcohol, the stronger the better, and a cloth for the patient to bite so they wouldn't bite. Their own tongue. The doctor would say, "Drink this and pray." Pray to whom? Pray you don't wake up halfway through. When surgery began, everything happened so fast you couldn't tell if they were treating you or just trying to finish in 30 seconds before lunch break. The knife sliced, blood flowed, patients screamed, and the doctor cheered, Almost done, even though only a third of the procedure was over. The absurd part? They believed screaming was a sign you were alive. If you stopped yelling, they panicked. Many survived only because the doctor ended the surgery quickly enough that germs didn't get a chance to work. The consequences? Infections came as a package deal, and surviving surgery was considered an achievement worth bragging about for life. Back then, surgery wasn't medicine, it was a gamble. And if your anesthesia was just booze and a cloth, yep, making it through a procedure was easier than surviving the way they had practiced medicine. 5. If you've ever stressed about forgetting deodorant, take comfort. In the Middle Ages, it wasn't a problem. Body odor wasn't just normal, it was practically a lifestyle. People believed natural smells reflected health, while smelling too nice was suspicious, like you were hiding something sinister. The problem? Perfume was so expensive you'd reconsider civilization itself just looking at the price tag. So peasants and the middle class got creative, stuffing dried herbs into their clothes. Mint, lavender, even tiny bouquets tucked under the arms, 100% natural. The goal wasn't to smell good, but to minimize damage when standing close to someone in a confined space. The funniest part? When everyone smelled, no one noticed their own stench. A group of peasants chatting might have resembled 5 dishes releasing aromas in 4 directions, and they all thought, yeah, probably fine. Nobles were slightly better off. They'd spray perfume so heavily that flowers in the room would wilt after a few minutes. Commoners? They just hoped the wind would take their side during any conversation. The Middle Ages had a talent for turning discomfort into routine, and if body odor was considered a sign of good health, congratulations. The stinkier you were, the more you were doing life right. 6. If you think medieval nutrition problems were just about missing veggies, you're partly right, but that wasn't the worst part. The real horror? They ate off lead. Lead bowls, lead plates, lead cups, sometimes even lead spoons. Fancy to look at, heavy to hold, but with a tiny side effect. It was poisonous. Very poisonous. Yet medieval folks didn't know. They just thought it was noble style. Meals proceeded normally. Ladle soup into the bowl. Tap the knife on the plate. Sip wine from a lead cup. And then they wondered why everyone in the castle started forgetting things, getting irritable, or staring at the wall like they were trying to remember where they lived. Some got chronic stomach aches. Others were confused enough to have full conversations with a candle. But instead of blaming the tableware, they blamed bad air, witches, or the moon. The ridiculous part? Lead made the wine taste slightly sweet, and people loved it. Nobles even showed off their sets like they were proudly curating a slow self-poisoning collection. Guests called it elegance. Guests left dizzy. And that they called fine dining. It's no wonder lifespans were short. When your meals combined fatty meat, moldy bread, and enough lead to build half a monument, surviving long was practically a miracle. The funniest part? They blamed it on improperly washed vegetables. 7. In the Middle Ages, there was a strange trend. Armor was crafted with extreme precision, except the helmet. The thing meant to help you see who you were fighting looked like a pot-on-your-head national championship entry. Many helmets were so enclosed that only 2 tiny slits were left, as if someone had hacked them out with a rusty knife in a hurry. Field of vision? About 3% if the sun happened to be in a nice mood. When knights marched onto the battlefield, they looked impressive, until they tried to spot the enemy. Peering through those tiny slits, everything was a blur, and they had to guess whether the moving shapes ahead were foes, allies, or a lost sheep. Some knights even leaned at odd angles like they were trying to find the perfect selfie angle. Then came the action. They raised their swords, charged with fiery spirit, and sometimes ran straight into bushes. One story recalls knights from opposing sides colliding not because of combat, but because neither could see where they were going. Spectators could even tell rookies from veterans by sound alone. New knights screamed with excitement. Experienced knights screamed because they had no clue where they were running. Helmets back then didn't just limit vision. They practically whispered to their wearer, "Go ahead, I'm not helping." And unfortunately, they kept that promise very well. 8. Medieval medicine was a romance. In a hazardous way, anything that looked weird was believed to be curative. No antibiotics, no tests. Just wild imagination and a give it a try, who knows attitude. Physicians would stare at a pot of stew and think, let's toss in a frog. That should cure a fever. And just like that, frog stew became an official prescription. Headache? Mix in some human hair? Skin disease? Sprinkle dust collected from a church onto the wound. Anything with religious vibes got a bonus effect. Basically, God's DLC. What about serious illnesses? That's when the doctor would get extra serious. Add goat's blood. Not human blood, not medicine, a completely innocent goat's blood. Medieval folks believed a healthy goat meant its blood would transfer strength. What they didn't know, they were just injecting bacteria straight into the patient. The funniest part, if the patient recovered, thanks to their immune system, not the stew, the doctor would proudly say, "See, frog stew plus hair plus church dust always works." If the patient didn't make it, they'd shrug and say, "Too bad the disease was too strong. We should have added more church dust." In the Middle Ages, there was no distinction between medicine and a hot pot, and sometimes the only thing that beat bacteria was sheer luck. 9. Here's a medieval truth that will make you sigh. People never lived alone. Not because they were lonely, it's because mice were always ready to be roommates. No permission asked, no lease signed, and definitely no rent paid. Barns had mice, homes had mice, and hospitals. Well, hospitals had so many mice you'd think they were getting paid in shifts. In the records, mice moved around houses as naturally as office workers grabbing coffee. Sleeping? A mouse scurries across your foot. Eating? A mouse climbs up for its share. Some places even got used to it enough to name the mice, just to tell which one belonged and which was a visitor. The funniest part, people back then often didn't see mice as a problem. They were just part of life, like morning fog or taxes. Spot a mouse in a hospital, shrug and move on. Yeah, it's been here a while. The problem is, mice weren't just cute. They carried fleas. Fleas carried disease, and disease, well, you know the rest. You could go to bed healthy and wake up with an epidemic just because you shared a hallway with a mouse. Ironically, medieval folks believed evil lurked in shadows, forests, and storms. But sometimes, the deadliest threat was right in the corner of your room, nibbling crumbs and staring at you like, "Not my fault, I just live here." 10. In the Middle Ages, the idea of a full house didn't just refer to people. Many families treated their homes like dorms for animals. Not barns, not backyards. Right in the living room, by the kitchen, next to the bed, where you'd expect to hear only the wind, not a rooster crowing at 2 a.m. Medieval folks kept chickens inside to prevent theft, pigs for warmth, and sheep, just out of habit. Walking into a house back then, and it's like a National Geographic documentary with an extra strong aroma. Kids played next to a pig the size of a wardrobe, while adults ate dinner and gently nudged sheep to make room. Nighttime was legendary. You try to sleep, while chickens test their vocal range, pigs grunt like bass shaking the floor, and sheep stroll around like security guards checking if anyone's still alive. Some people woke up in the middle of the night thinking someone was breathing on their face. It was just a sheep. The funniest part? Medieval people thought it was normal, even convenient. Meat, warmth, eggs. What else do you need? They said, while trying to sleep with the full orchestra of barnyard sounds filling the room. Keeping animals by your bed wasn't a cozy lifestyle choice like today. It was survival. And yes, it came with a 24/7 soundtrack. 11. In the modern world, kids go to school, play, snack, and complain, "I'm so tired." But in the Middle Ages, the concept of childhood was so blurry, you'd think it was a myth. At 7, it wasn't time to learn the alphabet. It was time to pick a trade. Children tall enough to reach the table were immediately put to work, fetching water, herding chickens, cleaning stables, farming, even helping parents with heavy labor. An 8-year-old back then often had more work experience than some adults today. And there was no complaining, no breaks, no mental health week. Adults didn't see this as cruel. To them, it was natural. It can walk, so it can work. Kids learn trades not out of choice, but because the household needed extra hands. Some learned to chop wood before learning to read. Others herded sheep before they could count to 20. The funniest part? Look at the paintings from that era. Kids appear as miniature adults. Same clothing, same labor, same exhausted expressions. You can't tell parent from child. Only the height gives it away. Childhood in the Middle Ages wasn't about playing outside, making mud pies, or eating ice cream. It was a demo version of a working life. And if you're wondering what games they played, sorry, the only playtime was moving from one task to the next. 12. In the Middle Ages, some laws sound like jokes, but the authorities were dead serious. One of them, every Sunday, people had to practice archery. Not if you feel like it, not optional, mandatory. You could skip church, skip visiting relatives, but miss archery practice? Sorry, that was breaking the law. Many villages looked hilarious on Sundays. Church bells in the morning, bowstrings snapping all afternoon like the whole town was training to be superheroes. Peasants, exhausted from a week of labor, might want a break, but the village official would show up and say, "Stand up, grab your bow, your turn." No one dared refuse. Defiance meant trouble, and trouble back then was never light. The funniest part? Most people were terrible shots. Some arrows went straight into hay bales, walls, and even nearly hit sleeping chickens. But the law was the law. Hit the target or not, you had to show up. Some villagers only mastered one skill, picking up arrows from the ground. And with the whole village shooting, walking past the practice field was a gamble. You could stroll peacefully and suddenly hear a whiz. An arrow zipped past your ear, and the shooter would shrug, "Sorry, I'm fulfilling my civic duty." Sundays weren't a day off back then. They were a day when the whole village realized the country needed them, even if their skills sometimes endangered each other. 13. In the Middle Ages, there was a toxic relationship everyone participated in: humans and sweets. Everyone knew their teeth were as weak as a New Year's resolution, but the moment something sweet appeared, their eyes lit up like they'd found treasure. Sugar wasn't common yet, so people used honey. Expensive, rare, and addictive beyond any village gossip. Medieval people put honey on everything, spread it on bread, mixed it into wine, stirred it into porridge, and even added it to medicine to make it easier to swallow. The poor might taste only a little in their lifetime, while the rich used it like their teeth wouldn't pay the price. The funniest sight was at noble banquets, everyone laughing and talking, while their teeth wobbled together in solidarity. Tooth decay wasn't a problem. It was fate. For toothaches, they stuffed herbs, tied ropes, burned smoke, tried everything except actually taking care of their teeth. Losing teeth by 25-30 was considered perfectly normal. And yet, sweets remained king. No one had the willpower to resist. Dentists of the time would look at a patient's collapsing teeth and declare, "It's the evil wind." Meanwhile, the patient nodded and licked the leftover honey from their hand. In the Middle Ages, teeth couldn't conquer temptation. But for them, tasting sweetness even a few times in life was worth it. Because teeth fall out, but the memory of sugar lasts forever. 14. If you think today's menu is boring, take a look at the Middle Ages, where cuisine wasn't a choice, but an endless loop. There was one dish appearing at every meal, every season, every social class. Porridge. Not fancy bone broth porridge, chicken porridge, or anything gourmet. Just plain grains boiled into something mushy as mud, with even less flavor. Medieval people ate porridge for breakfast to gain strength, lunch to survive, and dinner because there was nothing else. Sometimes they tried to vary the flavor by making it thinner or thicker, but mostly if you asked what was on the menu today, the answer would match yesterday, the day before, and last week: porridge. Some got creative, tossing in grass, roots, or anything that accidentally fell into the pot. But when resources were scarce, creativity was limited. Each meal felt like eating the same day of your life over again: bland, hard to swallow, and certainly repetitive. The funny part? They didn't see it as torture. Porridge was a symbol of stability. As long as there's porridge, it's fine. Of course, that's the thinking of someone who had never tasted pizza, cheese, or any spiced dish. Porridge in the Middle Ages wasn't a diet, nor a health hack. It was simply destiny. And if a time machine could take you back, you'd want to bring a pack of instant noodles. It would be the greatest luxury the whole village had ever seen. 15. In the Middle Ages, if you had a toothache, you didn't go to a dentist, because that profession didn't really exist. The closest thing to a dental expert was a man selling knives, scissors, and sometimes performing street tricks to draw a crowd. When he said, "I can pull it," that wasn't a professional promise. It was a challenge to fate. Tooth extractions didn't happen in a clinic. No chair, no lights, no sanitation. It happened right in the crowded marketplace, next to the vegetable stall and the chicken vendor. The dentist would stand on a platform like a street performer, the patient sitting on a wooden bench, shaking, while onlookers gathered around to watch and bet on whether the tooth would come out the right way. The tools were eclectic: rusty pliers, small knives, sometimes even ropes if the knife seller felt artistic. He'd grab the tooth, pull hard, the patient would scream, and the crowd would cheer at the satisfying yank. If it didn't come out, no problem. Try again. Failure only made the show more thrilling. People believed toothaches were caused by bad air, evil spirits, or foods out of alignment. So if a patient was still in pain after an extraction, another practitioner might be called in to burn incense and chase away the spirits. Looking back, oral care in that era wasn't really about health. It was about survival and spectacle. If you had a full set of teeth back then, consider yourself the luckiest person in the village. 16. Medieval law had its own unique style. Instead of investigating, interrogating, or looking for evidence, they just asked God. And they didn't do it gently. If you were accused and wanted to prove your innocence, they didn't request testimony. They requested your hand. In some regions, you had to stick your hand into boiling water. Not a quick dip, but long enough for divine observation. Elsewhere, you had to carry a red-hot iron a few steps, like walking a runway straight out of hell. Their reasoning was terrifyingly simple. If you were innocent, God would protect you. If you got burned, sorry, guilty as charged. The villagers watched nervously as if it were the championship game, while the accused tried to remain calm, hands steaming. Sometimes the results were checked 3 days later. If the burn healed quickly, you were innocent. If it festered, you were guilty. No one worried about bacteria. That concept hadn't shown up yet. The ironic and horrifying part was that some completely innocent people still got burned, leaving villagers shaking their heads while muttering, well, maybe they were guilty after all. The lucky ones who barely burned were hailed as living proof of justice. Justice back then wasn't about truth, it was about heat tolerance. And if the law worked this way, the innocent could only hope that God was on duty that day. 17. In the Middle Ages, beauty didn't come from sunscreen or mineral powder. It came from lead powder. That's right, the very metal that could confuse all of Europe was smeared straight onto aristocrats' faces as a fancy beauty secret. Pale skin symbolized status, while a tan suggested you actually had a job. A noble's morning looked like a full-on makeover. They mixed lead powder with vinegar into a thick paste and spread it over their face, neck, and even hands if they wanted a tone-on-tone effect. The result? Skin as smooth as wax, and toxins seeping in over the years like a deadly loyalty program. Onlookers marveled, wow, what a bright complexion. But up close, the lead cracked into flakes, like they'd just awakened from a 200-year nap in a cold tomb. Some even sweated white under the sun, like candles slowly melting. The irony? As their health declined, hair fell out, skin broke out, and spirits sank. They just applied more lead to cover it up. The solution was causing the problem. A toxic cycle, but a fancy one. When aristocrats died young, no one blamed makeup. It was the wind, the weather, or innate weakness. Beauty in those days worked remarkably well. It was effective enough to make sure you didn't even live long enough to age. 18. Medieval houses had one curious feature. They were about naturally ventilated. Not the fancy kind of airflow we enjoy today, but wind blasting straight in as if an uninvited guest showed up 3 meals a day. Windows didn't have glass. They were just open frames letting wind, dust, rain, birds, and sometimes neighbors stroll in freely. People living there got so used to it, they barely noticed it was a problem. Summer was tolerable, but winter was a nightmare. Cold gusts swept through like the entire village was inside a freezer. Their defense? 2 tools, cloth and faith, a thin piece of fabric over the opening, and a prayer that today's wind would be merciful. Many families hung blankets, cloaks, and sacks over the windows, creating a very manual insulation system. Still, the wind found a way in, weaving through cracks like it was playing dodgeball with the house. Children slept huddled up, adults kept fires going all night. And the cats? They picked the smartest solution: sleep on top of their owners. The funniest part? When someone suggested, why not put it in a glass? Everyone shook their heads. Not because they didn't want to, but because glass was so expensive you'd have to sell half your house to afford one small pane. Medieval homes didn't hold heat, but they held on to optimism. After all, if every night your teeth were chattering and the wind was whistling through every crack, you had to be very optimistic just to get some sleep. 19. Nighttime in the Middle Ages was nothing like romantic moonlight scenes. It was like stepping into a horror movie. But without a director yelling, "cut," No streetlights, no hanging candles, no stray glow from a neighbor's house. Once the sun set, the world switched to pure darkness, so black that holding up your hand didn't guarantee you could see it. Going out after dusk was a high-stakes gamble. Half the time, you'd get mugged because bandits treated darkness as a loyal ally. The other half, you'd stumble into a ditch, trip over rocks, slip in mud, or run into a wall, and no one would know because it was too dark to find you. Nightwalkers moved cautiously, like tiptoeing over a minefield, except the mines were less dangerous than a stray chicken. People tried candles for light, but the wind kept blowing them out. Lighting them again in pitch-black darkness was nearly impossible, so they moved on, holding flickering candles high, hoping the universe would turn on the lights for them. Storytellers would say, daytime belongs to humans, nighttime belongs to something else. Scary? Absolutely. But sometimes that something else was just a pig running by, making someone think they'd seen a ghost. Night in the Middle Ages wasn't just dark, it was life's hardest level. And whenever someone made it home safely, the neighbors would nod and say, wow, tonight must have been their lucky shift. 20. While modern people keep cats for cuteness and dogs for loyalty, medieval royalty had a very different mindset. The more dangerous the animal, the higher the status. Palaces became part-time zoos, where you could spot mischievous monkeys handling valuables, leopards sprawled on rugs, and even bears strolling the halls like night shift guards. No one thought this was a bad idea. On the contrary, keeping dangerous beasts was a statement of power. Our wealth is such that we can house an animal that could eat us anytime. Monkeys ran wild, snatching jewelry. Leopards lounged as if they owned the place. Bears raided cupboards because honestly, who would stop them? Visitors had to be extremely careful. A polite audience could turn into a survival game. Someone chatting might have a monkey leap up and snatch their hat, or a leopard saunter by, freezing them in place for 3 seconds. Encounter a bear in the corridor? Step back slowly and hope it's feeling zen. Royal pets were cared for meticulously, sometimes better than the common folk. But accidents were frequent. Monkeys bit people, leopards attacked guards, and bears knocked over nobles, thinking they were holding honey. In the Middle Ages, royalty didn't keep animals for fun. They kept them to show they feared nothing, even the possibility of being played with by their own pets at any moment. 21. One thing people rarely mention about knights. Sure, they looked impressive, but moving around was like hauling a mini refrigerator on your back. Each suit of armor could be so heavy that just standing up made your knees sigh in protest. Knights didn't stride into battle like movie heroes on horseback. They shuffled carefully, negotiating every step between willpower and gravity. Breathe too hard and the helmet trapped air. Breathe too lightly and suffocation threatened. Their vision was limited to a tiny slit, turning every step into a guessing game about where the ground actually was. Many knights tripped on roots, slipped in mud, or tumbled down slopes, and once down, getting up was harder than a 1-minute plank. Teammates had to haul them upright like displaying a heavy armor set. Meanwhile, foot soldiers without armor watched, half terrified, half amused. They saw knights getting stuck on fences or falling off horses like church bells knocked by a strong wind. Armor kept them alive in combat, yes, but it also made them look like they were fighting their own suit. In the Middle Ages, enemies were everywhere, but sometimes the biggest foe a knight faced was the mobile refrigerator they carried themselves. 22. Some punishments make you pause and think, yeah, this has to be the idea of someone who didn't get enough sleep. In the Middle Ages, one notorious sentence was to lock a criminal in an iron cage and hang them right in the town square. Basically a living billboard. It started simply. You committed a crime, and they didn't want to lock you in a dark room. Too much space, too much food, and most importantly, no audience to learn from your mistakes. So they dropped you into a metal cage just big enough to make a meditation pose look luxurious, then hoisted you high like holiday decorations. From there, your life became a free reality show for the entire town. Passers-by pointed, and kids tossed hard bread like projectiles to test accuracy. Some offered helpful advice, others just laughed like it was weekend theater. Want to sleep? Wind hits? Want to escape? The cage says no. Want silence? The market below disagrees. Criminals stayed up there until they learned their lesson deeply, or until the crowd got bored. And that's the worst part. The punishment wasn't measured in hours, but in the entertainment value it provided. The system ran on one simple, sarcastic principle. Punish, yes, but punish unseen. Waste of effort. 23. Winter in the Middle Ages wasn't a festive season, it was the final boss of the year. Modern folks complain about 50-degree F? Cute. Medieval people woke up to find the water in their basins, frozen solid, like it was auditioning for the Second Ice Age. It's not that they didn't want warmth. They did, but firewood was expensive, forests were far, chopping trees was risky, and the supply ran out last month. So the whole household slept in a room like an industrial freezer. Only difference: the medieval bedroom didn't have food, just people shivering like glitchy modems. At night, every breath became fog, and stone walls radiated a silent, you don't belong in warmth. People piled on 10 layers of blankets, huddled like human sandwiches, yet still prayed their noses wouldn't freeze into decorations by morning. The cold was so extreme that records note water bowls by the bed freezing solid, and that's when you realize winter plays for keeps. Amid all this freezing chaos, medieval people tried to act calm, like they were living normally inside a European igloo. Ask them who their greatest enemy was, and they wouldn't say war or plague. They'd pull up their blankets, exhale misty breaths, and reply simply, winter. 24. Sometimes medieval medicine makes you wonder, were they treating illness or auditioning for a horror movie? Anyone with a fever, headache, cough, fatigue, even a stomach ache from too much pie got the same diagnosis: bad blood. Drain it. Yes, the universal cure back then was bloodletting. The local physician would arrive looking more like a chef than a doctor. Small knives, bowls for catching blood, and the confidence of someone convinced that every life problem could be solved by removing a few pints. Stomach pain? Drain blood. Can't sleep? Drain blood. Fell down the stairs? Might as well drain some too, for balance. Patients sat there turning paler than their illness while the doctor nodded approvingly, like watching a steady revenue stream. If the patient fainted, that was considered a sign that heat toxins were leaving the body. And no one wanted to ruin the mood by asking, so if they die, is that like a full detox? The results were predictably disastrous. Patients lost blood, lost strength, and sometimes left the clinic literally feet first. But doctors stayed confident because the books said so. And those books weren't exactly written by the healthiest people either. The whole system ran on one absurdly simple belief: if something's wrong inside you, just open a valve. The Middle Ages had plenty of courage. But clearly, no one brave enough to say, maybe stop cutting people open? 25. If you think professional armies mean disciplined, sober, and precise, congratulations. You've never met medieval mercenaries. Many troops marched into battle not with steel resolve, but with enough alcohol in their veins to ignite a field of dry grass. It started with the fact that alcohol was the only thing they trusted. Water was dirty, milk spoiled fast, but wine. Wine always sparkled like a divine invitation. So before roll call, many soldiers warmed up with a sip to boost morale, another sip to calm nerves, and by the time the horn blew, they were tipsy enough to salute in the wrong direction. On the battlefield, chaos escalated. Some charged too early, some held back too long, and some twirled swords like they were performing fire dances at a village festival. Comrades scrambled to keep each other upright and prevent ungraceful spills into the mud. Officers surveying the ranks might as well have been supervising a bachelor party with weapons. The results were predictable. Tactical plans ruined, formations warped like a squashed pie, and the enemy occasionally won, not because they were better, but because they were the only side seeing clearly. The funniest part? Even after falls, stumbles, or losing half their armor, the mercenaries proudly declared, "I'm fine, just hand me another, sword." 26. In the Middle Ages, there was a little-known truth everyone whispered but no one said aloud. Eating bread could send you on a rather unusual journey. The cause was both simple and tragic. Wheat was prone to mold, and when it grew, it produced a fungus capable of turning breakfast into a full-blown psychedelic experience. The story usually began innocently enough. The family sat down for toasted bread, chatting about the harvest while the kids ran around outside. A few minutes later, everything shifted. Mom started seeing colors too bright to be real. Dad began talking to empty air, and the child swore the broom was laughing back. Since no one understood the true cause, the village speculated wildly. Some blamed demons, others invoked curses, and a few insisted the household had opened a portal to another dimension. Meanwhile, the real culprit was simply old, damp flour. Some regions even recorded whole communities acting strangely on the same day, which later led historians to assume some kind of ritual was taking place. Nope. They just ate bread from the same moldy batch. The results? People collapsed laughing, others panicked, running through the village, and some confessed all their secrets to the family cat. Bread was the staple of the era, but just a touch of the right mold, and suddenly lunch became a no reservation required trip through the most unexpected realms. 27. In the Middle Ages, human hair wasn't just hair, it was prime real estate for tiny tenants known as lice. No regular washing, no shampoo, no concept of weekly detangling, and suddenly their hair became the busiest little metropolis in Europe. With residents who were, let's say, not very polite, the story usually started innocently. Cold weather, scarce water, bathing risky for your health, so everyone just let it be. Long, matted hair twisted together like vines climbing walls. When conditions were dark, warm, and full of flavor, lice took it as a permanent invitation. They roamed freely like homeowners, held meetings, and even expanded branches onto beards and eyebrows. People had to use steel combs to pull out clumps, and if you heard a snap snap, that wasn't hair breaking. It was the sound of tiny residents being evicted. The consequences? Endless scratching, heads, necks, every possible angle, like performing a traditional dance. Some even wore scarves all day just to hide subtle hair movements, while their heads stayed put. And the funniest part? This was completely normal. Got lice? Tuesday. Your neighbor has them too. The whole village is in on it. No judgment. In the list of things you never want to admit, medieval hair ranked number 1 because once shared, the entire village would scratch along with you. 28. Poor medieval houses shared one common feature. You know what a window is? I know what a window is. But they only had a piece of fabric called a window. No glass, no frame, nothing. Just a thin, oiled cloth stretched like a windproof poster, which didn't actually block anything. The story starts with economics. Glass was so expensive that only nobles could consider it. Ordinary people lived in rooms as dark as wine cellars, with a wall opening covered by oiled cloth to keep out the rain. The result? Minimal light, plenty of drafts, and privacy. Forget it. During the day, sunlight barely made it through the thin fabric, giving the room a constant yellow-gray tint that seemed to drain the spirit. At night, anyone passing by could see shadows moving inside like an uninvited puppet show. Worse yet was the smell. No ventilation, no airflow, no natural air conditioning. Every odor, cooking, humans, animals, if they had any inside, swirled endlessly in the room as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. Many families ended up living in spaces that were dark, damp, stifling, and oxygen-starved. Open the door, and a gust of wind would burst in like it was thrilled to finally participate. The Middle Ages had plenty of challenges, but surviving in a window that isn't really a window definitely ranked near the top, because in the end, the only thing truly ventilated was hope. 29. If you've ever opened your oven and gotten a face full of smoke, imagine that happening 24/7, and that's life in a medieval house without a chimney. They built the hearth right in the middle of the home, and the rest was up to fate. Smoke would escape if it wanted to. If not, the whole family turned into a human smoked meat version. Morning started with opening your eyes in a room as hazy as a BBQ joint after closing time. Every object, furniture, blankets, even the cat, carried a light black coating, like an unwanted Instagram filter. People moved past each other barely seeing shapes, and conversations required guessing expressions by the volume of voices. The smoke was thick enough that clothes hanging in the room could be considered naturally smoked, and the ceiling darkened over the years as if painted with soot. The incredible part? Medieval people thought this was completely normal. Visitors? They'd say, "Don't worry, your eyes will adjust." A warning that felt more like a horror movie than a friendly greeting. The consequences were obvious. Stinging eyes, scratchy throats, smoky hair, and lungs aging faster than Black Friday deals. But everyone accepted it. Chimneys were expensive. Life then had two states, freezing outside and smoldering, smoky warmth inside. In the Middle Ages, no spa was needed. Your entire life was one big sauna. 30. Some medieval holidays make you wonder, Is this a religious ritual or a chaotic team building exercise planned by someone who had one too many drinks? People would gather in the church to pray, and minutes later, the entire square turned into a food battlefield. A loaf of bread flies at you, apples bounce, cheese rolls like cannonballs, and suddenly, that 40-minute sermon you just endured is completely forgotten. It doesn't stop there. After the food throwing comes the mock fighting, meant to be symbolic, but honestly, it looks more like two street gangs betting on who falls first. People wearing monster masks, wielding brooms as swords, donning pots on their heads for extra armor. It's like a crowd of extras running from a fantasy movie casting call. And if the local priest happened to overindulge, congratulations, the festival instantly enters turbo mode. The whole village suddenly participates in Who Can Outrun the Priest, a game where winning is awkward, losing is humiliating, and the safest move is don't get caught. By the end of the day, everyone returns slightly bruised, a bit sticky with food, maybe a little tipsy, but thoroughly entertained. Life in the Middle Ages was harsh enough that people had to create joy out of the absurd, helping them survive long, stifling winters and the constant threat of disease. And that's why these 30 seemingly absurd medieval truths existed. Because humans always find a reason to laugh, even when everything around them wants them to cry. If you enjoy history that's chaotic but true, leave a comment telling me which part made you go, no way! And don't forget to subscribe. There are plenty more bizarre historical stories waiting for you.